Hi, my name is Matt and I have taught college English for a little more than 10 years. And about 5 years ago, I started learning about and then teaching rhetorical devices. And basically, a rhetorical device is a tactic to make your language more impactful, immersive, and impressive. Therefore, it can also make you more persuasive. And so why am I doing this video? Well, I'm posting this 2 days after Joe Biden's presidential inauguration, wherein he gave a memorable speech as per tradition. At that same event, poet Angela Gorman read her poem called The Hill We Climb. I mention these two speeches because they used rhetorical devices both frequently and effectively, and Gorman's speech especially has received high praise, affording Gorman a lot of glory. In this video then, I will identify 17 of the devices used, as well as examples of usage for each device. Before I start though, I should note that many of the devices have Latin or Greek origins, and that the words themselves are often fairly long and polysyllabic, and sometimes difficult to spell and pronounce. However, they will start to sink in for you, and you will develop comfort with them if you make a practice of reading them aloud while walking around, modulating your tone, tempo, and pitch. Doing this avidly will improve your ability to think and speak extemporaneously. For this is an act of programming your mind to work in unison with your mouth, and your avidity will increase your proficiency. In other words, the more avidly you do this, the more quickly you will become proficient and confident. Eventually, you will find such devices slipping into your own speaking and writing, and to boil it down to an aphorism, if you do the work to aid your mind will aid the work you do, be it spoken or written. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoy. Okay, here we have our first device, and this one relates to syntax, or how you order words in a sentence structure, in other words. The first device is anaphora, which is when you repeat one or more words at the beginnings of phrases, clauses, or sentences. And in this activity, this video I'm doing today, I won't distinguish between clauses and phrases, even though there are distinctions. To keep things simple, I will typically just say phrases and sentences. So, in anaphora, you will start with the same word or word at the start of two or more phrases or sentences. Here are some examples from Biden's speech. The will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. Notice that right here, we start the sentence with identical language that we repeat right here. Keep in mind that the repetition can be just one word, or it can be a rather long phrase. Right here below, we have an example where it is just one word. We have learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. And now a phrase. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And now notice this one. Biden here is using something called a crot, a blip or very small incomplete thought that is punctuated as a sentence. Notice its impact on the rhythm of the reading. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. And I'll let you read the rest of these on your own. I'll go ahead and scroll through here so that you can see them. I just don't want to make the video any longer than necessary. By the way, one last one for Biden. Notice here that in this paragraph, we have, starting right here with here we stand, end of the sentence, here we stand, and then end of the sentence, we then have two more full sentences that intervene before we then resume repeating the anaphora, or the upfront repetition right here. If there is a long gap in between the repetition, I would call that an intervening word or phrase, or just an intervener. Okay, going on to anaphora in Gorman's poem and speech. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. Notice right here, we have upfront, we've. Going on further, let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried. Notice we open with, that even as we, that even as we, that even as we, and in the second half of each sentence, opens with we, and we. And let's take a look at the list of these words. We have grieved, grew, hurt, hoped, and tired and tried. These are examples of alliteration, which we'll get to later in this document. And in this truth, in this faith we trust, in this. Going on now from, again, anaphora, repetition at the front. Repetition in the middle is called Mesodiplosis. And so it follows this pattern right here. And so here is one such example from Biden's speech. You know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation. So there are basically two list items. And in the middle of each list item, we have the phrase of our. So again, anaphora, repetition up front, Mesodiplosis in the middle, and then there is one more that we'll get to bookend this lesson. Epistrophe, repetition at the ends of consecutive phrases or sentences. And it looks like this. And so some examples from Biden's work. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us. Let us listen to one another, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is better than this. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you do, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. Now here are some examples from Gorman's poem. And yet the dawn is ours. Before we knew it, somehow we do it. Ending these lines with it. And now, and so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. Ending here with it, ending here with us, ending here with our arms. So again, anaphora, repetition up front, Mesodiplosis, repetition in the middle, epistrophe, repetition at the end. Now, when you have repetition up front and then different repetition at the end, this is called Symploce or Symploce or Symploce or Symploce. There are different pronunciations of this. I don't think there is one definitive standard. And so again, this has repetition at the front and then at the end, like what we have here. This is America's day. This is democracy's day. Repetition of this is at the front, repetition of day at the end. We look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. So we be. Change in the middle from can to must. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. Notice that Biden refrains from the latter half of epistrophe here at the end. The audience comes to expect that at the end, but Biden provides some relief, some release from it. Keep in mind the role of expectation as you are doing any kind of piece or writing. Sometimes you want to satisfy the expectation. Sometimes you want to frustrate the expectation. And I got this specific analytical language from a book by Ward Farnsworth called Classical English Style. And I'll put a link to it underneath the video after I finish shooting the video. Okay, Antimetabole, a form of parallelism or the same, a repeated same or similar syntax, in which some words are repeated, but in the repeated instance, the position of the words are reversed. And this is maybe the most famous example. I mean what I say what I mean. We have an identical syntax or sentence structure, but here we have mean and then say, and then here we reverse it from say to mean. So it goes from this pattern, A to B, and to this pattern, B to A. And Biden says, we will lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. And an example from Gorman's poem. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? The only difference here is that we is in the subject position, so we is used, And then we is in the object position. So in the object position, we use the word us instead of we. Okay, Anadiplosis. When a word or phrase ends a phrase or sentence and then is used immediately again in the following sentence or phrase. And so it's like this. At the end, we use a word or phrase here, and then we use that exact word or phrase right at the beginning of the next phrase or sentence. And we see this in Biden's speech. This is Democracy's Day, a day of history and hope. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause. The cause of democracy. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. Notice that in each of the second halves of the usage of Anadiplosis, what follows is a more thorough elaboration. Here, Biden mentions a day, he repeats it, and then he gives more information about that date. He does the same thing with the cause of democracy, and with the way of unity, and then lies told for power and for profit. Okay, Epizeuxis, repeating a single word back to back at least one time, with no words in between. Okay, from Biden, it requires that most elusive of things in a democracy, unity. Unity. We have never, ever, ever failed in America when we have acted together. Repeating a phrase back to back is called epimony. One of the most famous such uses in American speech writing is in Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. In it, he says, free at last, thank the Lord Almighty, we are free at last. Starts with two back-to-back uses, has an intervening phrase, and then returns to that same phrase at the end. The intervening phrase could be an example of something called diacope, where you have an identical repetition, but then with an intervener somewhere in the middle. Okay, Hyperbaton or anastrophe. These are often used synonymously or to mean the same thing. This is when the normal word order is reversed, and commonly when an adjective is placed after a noun rather than before it. And this is something for which Yoda is known. If you want more information about that and examples, go ahead and look up Yoda and then type in either one of these words. And here is one such example of Hyperbaton in Gorman's poem. Our people diverse and beautiful will emerge. Normally, a writer would say our diverse and beautiful people. The inversion or the reversal of the adjectival phrase, diverse and beautiful, is what makes this Hyperbaton and anastrophe. This definitely will defy most people's expectations and can give a sense of emphasis too in that particular passage. Okay, Asyndeton. This is when you omit the coordinating conjunctions, the FANBOYS words, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so, in between list items of 3 or more. And so here we have some examples from Biden's speech. We look ahead in our uniquely American way. Restless, comma, bold, comma, optimistic. And set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. And another one. And here we have 3 different examples. Uniting to fight the common foes we face. Anger, resentment, hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, hopelessness. So again, when you have a list of 3 or more items and you don't put any coordinating conjunctions in between, you have Asyndeton, with the prefix a basically meaning not. It is a not syndetic phrase. If you put a coordinating conjunction like the word and in between each list item, this is called polysyndeton, with poly typically meaning many. Notice how this has a much different rhythm when, if we were to edit this and make this asyndetic. We look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless and bold and optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. Uniting to fight the common foes we face, anger and resentment and hatred, extremism and lawlessness and violence, disease and joblessness and hopelessness. I much prefer the asyndetic structure because there is more pause and therefore more emphasis. Okay, antithesis. This is when you place opposite terms or antonyms in proximity or near one another. This is very common in a lot of these political speeches. And so Biden writes, "Over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and war, we have come so far, but we still have so far to go. Notice peace, the opposite of war. Recent weeks and months have taught us painful lessons. There is truth and there are lies." And you could say truths and lies would be closer to being perfect antithesis, but I think this is close enough to make the point. And moving on, we must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal, with red representing the Republicans and blue representing the Democrats. I promise you this, as the Bible says, "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning." Notice that weeping is not quite a synonym of joy, but this tends to be more closely associated with sadness and pain than it does joy. And I guess you could say night and morning are not perfect antonyms. You could say night and day are perfect, but I think this is opposite enough to qualify as antithesis. And finally, of unity, not division, of light, not dark. Unity, division, light, dark, both opposites. And from Gorman's poem, we seek harm to none and harmony for all. Harm, generally the opposite of harmony, and none, the opposite of all. And this next one, Scesis onomaton, is when you list a series of words that have back-to-back that have roughly the same meaning or a very similar meaning. And going back to Biden, much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. And I think repair, restore, and heal are fairly close synonyms. We get a little bit further away semantically when we go with build and gain, but I think they're all close enough to qualify. As an extended example of Scesis onomaton, even though we have some intervening phrases in between each of these specific terms. Okay, Hypophora, asking a question and then answering it. And this is from Biden's speech. Biden asks, "What are the common objects we love that define us as Americans?" And he follows up with an answer. "I think I know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth." Parenthesis, not to be confused with the punctuation mark, as in right here. Parenthesis is a rhetorical device. When you're in a sentence, you use a word or phrase of secondary importance that is essentially an aside, and you can take that out of the sentence without losing the sentence's primary meaning. For example, right here, this is the primary meaning in the sentence from Biden. To overcome these challenges requires more than words. Now notice, he denotes the parenthesis with the dash before and then a dash after. And I'll read the whole thing. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul, and to secure the future of America requires more than words. You can denote parenthesis either with commas or parentheses or dashes. Okay, rhetorical climax, not to be confused with the climax of a plot. Typically in a 3-act structure, there will be a climax in the 3rd act right before the story finishes itself, or right at the finish. But this refers not to plot structure, but going from least to most. And when speaking of time, this can mean going from earliest to latest or into the future. So here we have one where Biden goes from least to most. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us. So he goes from least to a middle amount to the highest amount. And then, similar right here, in each of these moments, enough of us came together to carry all of us forward. Now we'll go on to time or temporality. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's. Goes from the past to the present to the future. And same here, that democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch, but thrived. That our America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears past, one another, present, and generations to follow, future. Notice right here, Biden is using multiple rhetorical devices, and I think to good effect. That did not happen, past. It will never happen, future. Not today, present. Not tomorrow, near future. And then not ever, for the foreseeable future. Notice he also starts with epistrophe, ending this sentence with not happen or happen. And then he ends this sentence with happen. And then he switches it up to anaphora, repetition at the front. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And a temporal climax in Gorman's poem. We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. Past to future. Okay, alliteration. There's a good chance you've heard of this one and that you've used it, even if you didn't know that you used it. It's very commonly taught in school, and it's quite fun as well. So this is repetition of the same letter or sound at the start of consecutive words. So we're not looking so much at syntax, but at the sounds made in words and letters. So this is from Biden's inauguration speech. Over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we have come so far, but we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and possibility. Notice right here, repetition of storm, or the S and the S at the front, and then the P and the P. We would call this an intervener, so this would be a bit of a loose alliteration. But if there are no gaps in between, if they are right back to back, like right here, virus silently stalks the country, we would call this strict or tight alliteration. Just as we see right here, a cry for racial justice some 400 years ago, in the making, moves us. And we have some interveners here. When he put pen to paper, the president said, etc. And there are so many, I'll let you read the rest of these on your own. Go ahead and pause it if you want to read them individually. And some examples from Gorman's poem. We've braved the belly of the beast, with some interveners. Somehow, we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. To compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. Notice here, we start with a D, and then go with a P, and then go with a D, and then go with a P, and then bookend with a D. We could call this an alternating double alliteration, where we have both the D sound and the P sound, alternating from one to another. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. And I'll let you read the rest of these on your own, and I especially recommend this one right here. Go ahead and pause it if you want to read this on your own. Okay, kind of difficult to pronounce. Homeoteluton. Repetition of the same letter or sound at the end of consecutive words. So alliteration, repetition of sounds up front. Homeoteluton, repetition at the end. And so from Biden's speech. What are the common objects we love that define us as Americans? I think I know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Notice that there is that TY, the T sound at the ends. T, 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 T. And something similar right here. Each of us has a duty and responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to, etc., etc. We have not only the S ending, but also the E ending formed by the usage of the Y. And a couple here from Gorman. And the norms and notions of what just is isn't always just this. Notice that the pronunciation of the ICE here is, where this is more of a Z or a Z sound. If you're interested in naming the specific sounds made by phonemes or individual units of sound, I recommend studying linguistics and specifically phonology and phonetics. For again, the broader your vocabulary, the more you can understand all of these elements about reality. I'm going to talk more about that later in this video. Resuming. We didn't feel prepared to be their heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. Okay, assonance. This is repetition of the same vowel sound, be it at the fronts of words, and or in the middle, and or at the end. Doesn't matter where in the word it occurs. Notice right here from Biden's speech. To all those who supported our campaign, I am humbled by the faith you have placed in us. We have bookmarks. We have an sound here and an sound here, and they are bookmarking some a sounds here, faith and placed. Moving on, we can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts. And notice right here, hardening our hearts. Often people pronounce this with an sound, r. So essentially we have an I, an o, an I, and then an ah. Moving on to Gorman. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. Notice the rhyme right here. I'm not going to get into rhyme or metaphor or simile or analogy much in this, if at all, so I recommend looking up the term rhyme scheme if you're interested in, for instance, how Gorman ends a lot of the sentences in the poem, the lines in the poem, with a very particular pattern to, I think, great artistic effect. Okay, if assonance is repetition of vowels, consonance is repetition of consonant letters, regardless of where they occur. Like here, if we can do this, if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts. So again, we had mentioned the O sound previous, we've also got R sounds. R, hardening our hearts. And in this truth, in this faith, we trust. Okay, back to syntax a little bit. A parallelism, using the same word or words to start and end a sentence. And here we have this from Gorman. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit, it's the step we step into and how we repair it. Ending this, opening the long sentence with it, and then ending it with its. Okay, and so some final thoughts that I wanted to share with you here. I would not be able to remember all this and then speak extemporaneously, so I have my guide right here, a little bit of my writing. I'm still working on a lot of these ideas. I would think that a lot of people who have studied philosophy extensively could very well supplement and give a lot more meaning and insight to these things I'm talking about here. With that said, I'll go ahead and read. So to help you further understand my interest in the preceding analysis, I would like to discuss a term studied in philosophy, ontology, the study of being and the notion of reality. As we all know, what is considered real and what is considered not real, or what is not considered real. This has long been debated and with no end in sight. Also, this notion of the real rubs shoulders with the notion of the true, or reality and truth are often seen as one and the same. And so I mention this to emphasize the importance of ontological study for the perception of what's true and real influences, to name some examples, the outcome of court cases, the passing of laws, the entering into of friendships, relationships, business contracts, and leisurely pursuits. When people disagree about what is real and what is true, what often results is a decrease in trust and harmony, and an increase in conflict and sometimes violence, or even war. Therefore, because this notion of reality is so important with human culture, I am continually examining the ways in which we frame and then explain reality. I think of people using letters, words, to describe reality, sentences, literal language, figurative language, prose, poetry, theater, paintings, drawings, sculptures, numbers, and math. All of those things to try to help us represent what we think is real or not real. And I also think of maps. I think of the notion of mapping reality. I think of reality as a plane that can be mapped, even if that might currently be an impossibility in some respects. To use some fancy academic language, and hey, I'm a teacher, so why not? A metaphorical plane of reality is the ontological topography, the lay of the land of reality. And when we try to map it, we are ontological cartographers. We are trying to make maps out of our understanding of reality. And the more ways we have of describing reality, the more precise and useful maps we can make, and the better ontological cartographers we can become. I'm returning to the usage of words to describe reality, Your ontological cartography and the ability thereof is limited by your vocabulary. Therefore, the more words you acquire, the more likely it is that you will come to possess that which you desire. Thank you for listening. If you found this helpful, please consider giving me a like and/or subscribing. Have a good day.